Hello and welcome to STEM 351 Communication Technologies at Old Dominion University in the spring of 2019. And I believe we're going to have a bad snowstorm this weekend, but it's okay since we're online, we'll be all right. I am Dr. Virginia Jones and I will be your instructor for this course. So first of all, welcome to class. A few things you need to understand about class. This is an upper level class, and it's also considered an upper level gen ed class. This is a very intense class. Although it's online, it has a lot of requirements to it. It requires a lot of self-direction, and it also requires that you are able to work with others in your class to provide a team project for the others in class to review. So this takes a lot of self-direction, and that's why we have a very intense schedule that you can read over. The reason that I make you work in a team, I'm just like you. I really don't enjoy having to work in teams, especially when I can't see the people face to face. But it is very important because it's a skill that you will use when you graduate from college. A lot of times in the workplace or in training scenarios, you have to work with others to develop a product, and you may never see them face to face. So this is a very valuable skill that you can take with you. First of all, we want to talk about the syllabus. The syllabus and the schedule are posted in Blackboard. You'll see the syllabus. If it'll pop up, we'll see it. This is the syllabus for this year. You see all the information. This tells you what the purpose of this course is and the things that you should know when you finish this course. The objectives of this course are pretty intense, as you can see. What you are really learning is how to develop a training type of module that could be used to help others learn a new skill. So if you look along in here, let me see if I can find it. It says you're going to develop storyboards, but you're going to develop an e-learning module, and you're also going to evaluate other modules that you see to see if they provide the type of training that really helps a person learn and understand a concept. Now, this is a totally online class, but like I said, it does have a lot of requirements in it. So I have a pretty intense, hopefully well laid out, considering my recent illness. I hope I haven't made too many mistakes on it, but a pretty intense schedule to it. You'll see how the assignments are broken down. We have what they call e-learning lesson critiques. We have 8 of those, and they're 20 points apiece, and they're scattered throughout the semester. It's very critical that you pick a training or learning based type of training video. Don't just pick something off of YouTube like how to take a picture or how to change a tire, because when you get further into the content of the course, it's going to be harder to understand the nuances of that training and whether it really meets the criteria. Like I said, the team chapter presentations are a very key part of this course. We also have where you have to evaluate. So if you are not the team presenting for the week, say week 5, but you are watching the presentation, you're supposed to critically evaluate it. Now, the people who wrote the presentation will not see it. I will be the only one who sees it, but it's important you look at it through a critical lens and say, did I really learn what they thought I was going to learn? Did they cover things the way it should be based on the concepts in the book? We have 5 quizzes that you can take over numerous times and get your best score. So these are all things that are pretty self-explanatory. You'll see I had to change this. Originally, when I posted the syllabus, I had accidentally removed the quizzes, so it didn't add up to 500. I went back and put that in. Your final project is 34% of your final grade, and participating in class, turning in assignments, actually being engaged in what we're talking about counts for 3% of your grade. The rest of it's pretty easy. Most of you are familiar with classes based on points, but you'll see a chart here that tells you what the point values are so that you will know what you need to do. Please be sure when you upload your assignment that it is in Microsoft Word or Pages or something like that. Do not submit an assignment as a PDF, because I need to be able to go into it and make corrections and make additions. So if you put in PDF, it just makes it a little more complicated. It is important, even though this is an online class, if you miss more than a fourth of the assignments that we have, and we have one pretty much every week, you will receive a failing grade for this course because you are not participating. The rest of it I know you can read on your own, so we'll just skip over that. Like I said, we also have the schedule. The schedule is attached in Blackboard, and I'm hoping that I didn't make any due date mistakes on here, but pretty much the weeks start on that Sunday and run through that Saturday night. And you'll see that things are due that Saturday night no later than midnight. Now, late assignments are not really acceptable because it just gets you further and further behind. But if it's 5, 15, 20 minutes after midnight, that's okay. But if it's going to be more than several hours or several days, then you need to contact me, and unless you have a really valid reason, you cannot submit an assignment more than 3 days late. So you'll see that we go through, and the very first week you have to get this sample lesson so that you can use it for the first assignment, and you'll see that you go through every week and do it on different ones. When you get down to week 4, you'll see this is when the teams start their presentations, and it goes through the schedule, and everything in here is pretty self-explanatory. But if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. So also in Blackboard, I have some APA tips and hints to help you. Also a short video on how to narrate a PowerPoint, a video on how to do a Prezi. These are things to help you. You don't have to buy an expensive tool to try to do this online learning module. If PowerPoint is your comfort level, then use PowerPoint, but it needs to be interactive. It needs to have narration. It needs to have some type of assessment at the end to make sure that the learner learned what they wanted. You see my number here. You're always welcome to contact me anytime you need to. Also, we have team projects, and the teams are posted in Blackboard, and each team will work on a chapter starting, I believe it's with chapter 4 and goes through chapter 10. And there are some criteria for working in a team. You'll see the presentation guidelines in there. You will also see the critique, but it's vitally important that as a team you work together, and that everyone is responsible for the content, and everyone contributes. If someone is not contributing, you should have a team leader, not to be boss or to be in charge, but just to make sure everything is done and turned in. And if that is the case, that someone is not contributing, then you need to let me know, because their grade will reflect that they did not contribute to the project.
So let's begin with chapter 1, which is e-learning, the promise and the pitfalls. And here's a copy of the text just for your review. So what is e-learning? Our text defines this as instruction that's delivered on a digital device that is intended to support learning. So if you look on page 8 of the text, you'll see that they list a lot of different things that e-learning should do and things that we will examine. E-learning can be synchronous, asynchronous, it can be a blended class, it can use the internet, it can be professional training you receive on the job, which might use the intranet or be cloud-based. E-learning, especially today, uses a lot of media elements. It can also use learner collaboration, where a synchronous class might have breakout rooms, or asynchronous may use online quizzes or discussion boards. But basically, e-learning is to help develop a skill for individual learning or organizational performance goals. So as you can see from the definition that we talked about, there are 3 major elements that should be included in e-learning: the what, the how, and the why. E-learning should include content, obviously, the information presented with a technique or an instructional method to help the learners learn the content. How e-learning is presented is by different digital devices in any format. It's the E of the e-learning. And the why. Why do we do e-learning? Because we want to help learners achieve personal learning objectives. So is e-learning better than traditional learning? This is something that has been discussed for many years since e-learning began. Computer-based training started back in the 60s and was used quite frequently. Currently, it is probably 55 or more % of learning that takes place. The Army was one of the biggest users of a type of e-learning where they had film and film strip presentations for the soldiers. And they did a research study and they decided that using this modality provided better learning results than having actual classroom instruction. But research from different years, 94, 98, 2001, 2004, and on, shows what they call achievement effect sizes, which is something we'll talk about later in this course. But this research basically compared electronic distance education, which is what they used to call e-learning, to traditional classroom education. So you see, when you look at effect size, the thing that you see is that most of the results cluster right here, so that the effect size right here from 0, there's not much deviation, less than 1/4 of a percentage point. So the thing that we want to remember about e-learning is when the instructional method remains essentially the same, so does the learning, no matter which medium you use. So no matter whether you do it with e-learning or face-to-face, as long as the instruction is essentially the same, students will learn. So what are some of the promises of e-learning? E-learning offers customized training and instruction. If you think about it, we mean that this is where you can tailor the content and the methods and the way that you navigate through the program based on the need of individual learners. Think about programs where you learn how to use a new software program, or where you learn to do something. Maybe you've seen a YouTube video. That would be a most current type of informal e-learning, where you want to learn how to replace maybe the spigot in your bathroom sink, and you can find a YouTube video to help you learn that. Another promise of e-learning is the engagement, because we know all learning requires engagement, but in e-learning we have two types of engagement that happen. We have behavioral engagement, which means it's an overt action that a learner takes during instruction. So some of this is, you pressing the forward arrow, typing an answer, clicking in an option, or doing different things that require interaction on the part of the learner. Psychological engagement means the cognitive processing of the content in a way that helps the learner acquire new skills and new knowledge. Another promise of e-learning is multimedia, and we are all aware that multimedia has really changed the face of e-learning. We have text, we have audio, you can incorporate videos, we have Prezi, we have so many different ways to bring about e-learning using different multimedia tactics. So it's really been a big bonus to e-learning to have the use of multimedia. Acceleration of expertise is something that we don't always think about, but historically, for you to become an expert in an area, it usually took you about 10 years to become an expert at a certain skill or craft. And in some workplaces, you may not always get the opportunity to fine-tune those skills and develop the skills that you need because you don't always have the opportunity to do this. So having simulations and opportunities where you can do the work in a simulated environment has helped people gain more expertise. And then the last is digital games, and we know that digital games came on the scene of e-learning with a little bit of controversy attached to them because a lot of professors and public educators thought that we didn't want to turn education into a game for students. We weren't there to provide entertainment. But new research has shown that gaming actually helps learners engage, and it helps them think more critically and develop skills. You know, some of the characteristics of games is that they have rules in a simulated system. They respond to the player when the player makes a move. It is challenging. It is cumulative, so you know you achieve different levels or you reach certain areas toward your goal. And above all, it's very inviting because it offers appeal and interest to the user. So these are all things that we like about e-learning. Now, pitfalls of e-learning, too much of a good thing. You know, sometimes we have a tendency to want to overdo this, so we don't want to have every flash and every bang and every picture and every animation you can. If you can think back when people used to use PowerPoint and they would have every animation possible on the presentation, and people would sit there and go, really, I cannot stand this. So that's too much of a good thing. And we want to be conscious of that. You've got to find that sweet spot where it's just enough to engage, but not too much to distract from the learning process. So the second one ties into this, not enough of a good thing. You know, you don't want to have just a wall of words, not just text. You have to have things that engage the learner in different ways. Another problem with e-learning is losing sight of the goal. You know, we always have to make sure when we are developing a training that the key skills that we are trying to present are going to promote organizational goals and build the training around the tasks that make those skills. Sometimes as technologists, we get caught up with the technology and want to do learning based on whatever's the latest craze in technology. So we have to be very careful and make sure that we use the technology that will best leverage the learning of the people we are presenting it to. And the last pitfall is discovery learning, because we all know how easy it is to discover and learn things on the internet. In fact, Google is now a verb, because if you need any information, you don't look it up the way you used to. You just go Google it and find out information. So one lesson we've learned from this is that peer discovery learning rarely works. We still have to have some structure that's going to provide appropriate guidance for our learners. So we have two major guidelines that apply to e-learning, and we have to decide what type of e-learning we are seeking to provide our learners. One is to inform. We're just presenting information. We're just saying this is, you know, something about the history, a historical thing, a new product, features of a new product. Or is this something that's going to have performed, something that they need to have procedural skills to understand? If you look on page 19, you'll see table 1.1 gives you a nice little chart of this. So when we talk about two types of performance goals, they fall into two different categories, and we call them near and far transfer, which sounds a little different at first, but when you think about it, it makes sense. You have what's called a procedural performance goal, and that promotes near transfer. And what that is something like if you're learning a new software product, because there's usually one correct way to perform that skill, so it's pretty lockstep in what you learn. You learn that this is the way you do it always. Strategic is considered the type of promotes the transfer of far transfer, because this is more general, it's more strategic, it's multiple ways to achieve a particular outcome. And examples of this would be when people have to use their own judgment, so they're learning soft skills, supervision, or management skills in a type of training. We also have e-learning architecture that we need to be aware of. And although all e-learning is delivered on a particular digital device, different courses reflect different assumptions of learning, which we introduce here and describe. So we have different types of architecture based on learning assumptions. So we have receptive, where you're acquiring information; directive, where you're trying to strengthen your responses and your skills; or guided discovery, which we talked about a little bit as a promise of e-learning, where you construct knowledge in a guided way. Now, these architectures also deal with the levels of interaction learners have with the learning, and there is a table 1-2 on page 21 that you can look at. But receptive has low behavioral engagement, directive has medium, and guided discovery has high. So what does this mean? When you have receptive architecture, it means you have very low engagement. So this goes back to your types of training where you're just presenting a new product, or you're just giving a history of something. You're just giving them information with few opportunities for them to respond. Directive uses the classic training example we all understand, where they give you an explanation, give you an example, question, and then feedback. Guided discovery often is in the simulations, but it's where learners perform the task while they're still receiving guidance from the program. And this encourages both behavioral and psychological engagement. So what is effective courseware? This is the intent of our learning and discovery in this course. So we want to talk about what's really going to make our training modules that we develop effective for our learners. So we have three overarching constructs for effective courseware. One is our training goals. We need to make sure that our goals or our intended outcomes, they will influence what kind of courseware you want to use, and that you have to make sure that the guidelines that you use to develop your goals are appropriate for what you want the learners to learn. You have to make sure that you are conscious of the visuals, the narration, and the text that you use to present the information, because you want to help your learners achieve skills. You also need to be aware of learner differences. Lessons should include instructional methods appropriate to learner characteristics. Something that is very important to understand is learners' prior knowledge of course content, because that exerts the most influence on how much people will actually learn from the training. Learners with little knowledge will benefit from different instructional strategies than learners who are relatively experienced. For this course, we're mostly going to talk about guidelines that we use for adult learners who are new to this type of course content. And the last factor that we want to talk about is the context. And that includes such issues as technical constraints of the delivery platform that you're using, the network, the authoring software, the policies related to the learning management systems that your learners might be using, cultural factors in the institutions, such as the acceptance of and routine familiarity with technology, And then different restraints such as those related to budget, time, and management expectations. There are a lot of things that you have to consider, and sometimes you have to let those be your basic guidelines when you're developing your learning. So to conclude this week's brief chapter, I want you to realize that you do have an assignment that will be due next Sunday evening, and you need to find a training or learning example that you can use for several assignments throughout this course. Find one that you can analyze for a type of e-learning, how it uses multimedia, and other principles of e-learning. So that concludes our introduction to Chapter 1. If you have any questions or comments, you can send me an email and I will be glad to respond. Thank you, and stay safe and warm this week.